Right now, somewhere in your home there is a bar of soap. You have used it today, maybe an hour ago, without thinking about it for even a second. It seems like the most boring object in the world. It is not. That bar of soap is standing at the end of a 4,000-year-long trail of secret formulas, government taxes designed to keep people dirty, and a doctor who was locked away and left to die because he tried to tell the world that this exact object could save millions of lives, and nobody would listen to him. This is the strange, true origin of soap, and how something you barely notice ended up deciding whether entire generations lived or died. To understand how something this small could carry that much weight, you have to go back nearly 4,000 years, to a substance so ordinary that for most of human history, nobody thought it had anything to do with saving a single life. Around 2800 BCE, in the ancient city of Babylon, someone recorded a recipe on a clay cylinder. Fats boiled with ashes. It is the oldest known written formula for soap on earth. But this is not a story about hygiene yet. The Babylonians were not washing their bodies with this mixture. They were cleaning wool, preparing textiles, using it in medicine. The idea that this substance could stop disease from spreading was not even a question, because nobody understood that disease spread that way at all. The formula did not stay in Babylon. It traveled. In Sumer, clay tablets preserved step-by-step instructions for making it. By 1550 BCE, in Egypt, a medical document called the Ebers Papyrus described mixing animal fats or vegetable oils with a natural mineral salt to create a cleansing paste. The Egyptians were not just cleaning cloth anymore. They were using this on skin, for medicine, for the body itself. By the time the substance reached the Phoenicians and then the Romans, it had a name. Some said it came from a mountain outside Rome, where rain supposedly washed animal fat and ash down into a river, and women found their laundry came out cleaner. It is a good story. It is very likely not true. What is true is that the Romans built an entire culture around bathing, and soap became part of daily life across the empire. And then, for close to 2,000 years, nothing about this substance changes the world. It is useful. It is unremarkable. It cleans cloth, it occasionally treats skin conditions, and it sits quietly in the background of civilization while empires rise and fall around it. That changes in the 8th century in the cities of the Islamic world. In Aleppo, Nablus, and Damascus, chemists do something nobody had done before. They stop treating soap making as a craft and start treating it as a science. A 9th century chemist named Jabir ibn Hayyan documents methods for extracting a powerful alkaline compound, refining the exact chemical reaction that turns fat into soap. The soap made in Aleppo is unlike anything before it. Solid, hard, scented with laurel oil. Aged for months in underground chambers until it becomes something close to the bar sitting in your bathroom right now. This soap becomes valuable enough to export across the Mediterranean. When crusaders return from the Levant to Europe, they don't just bring back stories. They bring back the formula. Spanish Castile and French Marseille build entire industries on techniques learned from Aleppo. For the first time, soap making becomes a serious, profitable trade across an entire continent. Which is exactly when a government decides to punish people for wanting to be clean. If you want to see how a nation once made it illegal to be affordably clean, and how that same century almost let a doctor die for trying to prove soap could save lives, subscribe to BeforeCommon because this story is about to get a lot darker. In 1712, England introduces a tax on soap. Overnight, the price of even the most basic bar triples. Cleanliness stops being something ordinary people can afford and becomes a luxury for the wealthy. Manufacturing is placed under such tight government control that soap makers are legally required to lock their equipment away when it isn't in use. Some give up entirely and move their businesses to Ireland, where the tax doesn't apply. Others start smuggling soap like contraband. This tax does not last a few years. It does not last a decade. It lasts 141 years. For nearly a century and a half, the government of one of the most powerful nations on earth makes it financially difficult for its own citizens to wash. It is not repealed until 1853. And it is repealed just 4 years before a doctor in Vienna discovers exactly what happens when the people meant to protect your health refuse to wash their hands at all. Inside Vienna General Hospital in 1847, there are 2 maternity clinics, standing almost side by side, separated by nothing more than a hallway. On paper, a pregnant woman walking through the hospital doors that year has an even chance of being assigned to either one. In practice, that assignment is close to a death sentence, and by this point in the city, everyone quietly knows it. Clinic 1 is staffed by doctors and medical students. Clinic 2 is staffed entirely by midwives. Women admitted to Clinic 1 die of childbed fever at a rate close to 18%. In Clinic 2, admitted for the exact same reason, giving birth to the exact same kind of child in the exact same building, the death rate sits near 2%. The fever itself is brutal and fast. It begins with a high temperature, moves into the abdomen, and within days can shut down organ after organ. A woman can walk into the hospital in labor, healthy, and be dead within a week, while her child, if it survives at all, is left motherless. The gap between the two clinics is so well known outside the hospital's walls that pregnant women in Vienna begin doing something that sounds almost unbelievable today. They beg not to be admitted to Clinic 1. Some choose to give birth on the street rather than risk its doors, reasoning correctly that an unassisted birth outdoors is statistically safer than a bed inside the doctor's ward. Ignaz Semmelweis walks those halls every day. He is young, ambitious, recently appointed, and he cannot let the number go. He tests every variable he can think of. Crowding in the wards. Diet. Even the position women are told to give birth in. Every test comes back the same. Nothing explains it. Two clinics, treated the same in every way anyone has thought to measure, and one of them is killing nearly 10 times as many women as the other. Then, in March of 1847, Semmelweis takes a short leave from the hospital. When he returns, he learns that his close friend Jacob Kolechka is dead. Kolechka was a professor of forensic medicine, a man whose entire career was built around examining bodies after death. During a routine autopsy, a student's hand slipped, and the same knife being used to open the corpse cut Kolechka's finger. It was a small wound. Nobody in the room thought much of it. Within days, Kolechka was running a high fever. The infection moved through his abdomen, into his lungs, and finally into his brain, and then he was gone, killed by a nick from a blade that had only moments earlier been inside a dead body. Semmelweis reads the account of his friend's death and cannot move past one detail. He has seen this exact progression before. Not in a colleague. In the women dying in Clinic 1. The same fever. The same speed. The same organs failing in the same order. It is standing over that realization that the full shape of the answer arrives. Every morning, before their rounds, the doctors and students of Clinic 1 perform autopsies in the hospital's dead house. Then they walk directly into the maternity ward and examine living women in labor, hands unwashed, carrying with them whatever had killed the person on the table minutes before. The midwives of Clinic 2 never enter the dead house. They have no reason to touch a corpse at all. It was never about diet or crowding or how a woman was positioned to give birth. It was about what was on the hands reaching inside her. In May 1847, Semmelweis orders every doctor and student in Clinic 1 to wash their hands in a solution of chlorinated lime before they touch a single patient. Plain soap and water, he decides, is not strong enough to strip away whatever is clinging to their skin after an autopsy. Chlorinated lime is harsher and it works. The results are immediate. Mortality in Clinic 1 falls from just over 18% in April to under 1% by the end of the year. By 1848, out of 3,556 patients, only 45 die. He believes he has just handed the medical world a discovery that will save the lives of mothers everywhere. Instead, he is about to learn exactly how far people will go to protect a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth. If you want to see how the medical establishment responds when a young doctor tells them they have been killing their own patients, subscribe to BeforeCommon, because what happens next is the reason this story still matters 200 years later. Semmelweis takes the results to Professor Johann Klein, the man who oversees Clinic 1, expecting to be believed immediately. Instead, Klein refuses him. To accept what Semmelweis is describing, Klein would have to accept that he and every doctor under him have been killing their own patients with their own hands for years without knowing it. There is no microscope image to point to. No visible organism. Germ theory does not exist yet, and without it, All Semmelweis has is a wash basin and a column of numbers that keeps proving him right to men who have every personal reason not to listen. He is not the first man this has happened to. 4 years earlier, in 1843, in a city Semmelweis has never visited, an American doctor named Oliver Wendell Holmes stood in front of his own medical society in Boston and made almost the identical argument that childbed fever was being carried, patient to patient, on the hands of the very doctors meant to help them. Two of the most respected obstetricians in the country turned on him immediately, insisting a physician could never become, in Holmes's own words, a minister of evil. His paper was printed in a small journal that folded within the year. Almost nobody read it. When Semmelweis reaches the same conclusion, alone, with no knowledge Holmes had ever written a word, it stops being one doctor's strange theory. It becomes proof that the same uncomfortable truth had already knocked on medicine's door once before, and been turned away. Klein's refusal does not end it. Semmelweis keeps records, meticulously, for years, and every year the numbers say the same thing. Enforce the hand-washing and mortality collapses. Loosen it even slightly and the deaths climb back. In 1848, the French Academy of Sciences even publishes a note describing his results. For a moment it looks like recognition might finally come. It doesn't. Many of Vienna's doctors would rather believe in some vague poisoned air moving invisibly through the ward than accept that the danger has been standing at the bedside the entire time, wearing one of their own coats. He loses his position in Vienna. He returns to Hungary, takes a post in Pest, enforces the same hand-washing protocol, and watches mortality fall to close to 1%, an even better result than his first. It changes almost nothing about how he is regarded by the wider profession. For 11 years he refuses to publish his complete findings, distrustful of a medical establishment that has already told him exactly what it thinks. When he finally does, in a full-length book, the response is not engagement with his numbers. It is criticism of his tone, his temperament, his character. Something in him begins to break under the weight of watching preventable deaths continue while the one person who could stop them keeps being ignored. In one of his final open letters, addressed directly to the men who rejected him, he writes that thousands of mothers and infants have died since 1847 who would not have died had he stayed silent about his own failure to convince anyone sooner, and tells one of his harshest critics plainly that the man has been a partner in that massacre. By 1865 his health, mental and physical, has collapsed. He is committed to an asylum in Vienna. Weeks later he is dead at 47 from an infection that took hold after injuries he sustained during his confinement there. The man who spent the last 2 decades of his life trying to convince the world that unwashed hands carry death from one body to another is killed, in the end, by exactly that. He does not live to see himself proven right. That proof arrives 2 years later. In 1865, British surgeon Joseph Lister encounters the research of Louis Pasteur, who has just shown germs are real, living organisms capable of spreading disease. Lister begins treating wounds and instruments with carbolic acid, and infection rates in his patients fall dramatically. In 1879, Pasteur identifies the exact bacterium responsible for the infections that killed so many of Semmelweis's patients. He was right. He had been right the entire time. He simply did not live long enough to hear anyone admit it. If a story like this makes you want to know what else the everyday objects around you have been hiding, subscribe to BeforeCommon, because this is exactly the kind of history we dig up every week. Even after Lister's carbolic acid and Pasteur's discovery finally forced the medical world to admit Holmes and Semmelweis were right all along, one problem remains. Proving something to scientists is not the same as convincing millions of ordinary people to change a daily habit. Knowing that soap and water can stop an infection means nothing if the average person still doesn't reach for it. That problem gets solved not by another doctor, but by advertising. In 1807, a London barber named Andrew Pears began producing a soap unlike anything else on the market, a transparent, gentle bar refined from glycerin. For decades it is simply a well-made product. Then, in the final years of the 19th century, it becomes a symbol. Pears becomes one of the first products in history sold using a celebrity's face, paying the famous socialite Lily Langtry to claim the soap kept skin clear and pure. For the first time, buying a bar of soap isn't just about cleanliness. It's about status, about being seen as refined and modern. Not every choice the advertisers made has aged well. Some of Pear's most infamous campaigns leaned directly into the racial prejudices of the era, tying whiteness to purity in ways that are uncomfortable to look at today. It is a reminder that even something as universally beneficial as soap can be twisted into a tool for the ugliest ideas of its time. Around the same period, an Englishman named William Lever changes the industry from the ground up. Soap has always been sold the way a grocer wants to sell it, cut by hand from a large block. Lever's idea is simpler. Pre-cut every bar. Wrap it. Brand it. Sell the exact same bar in every shop in the country, under one trusted name. It sounds obvious now. In his time, it is a small revolution, and the company he builds eventually becomes one of the largest consumer goods corporations on earth. Knowing soap could stop disease and having a habit stick in millions of households were still two very different problems. The final push doesn't come from science or advertising alone. It comes from fear of a different disease entirely. In the early 20th century, tuberculosis is one of the deadliest diseases in the world, and American schools respond by launching something called the Modern Health Crusade. Children are taught, as a matter of daily classroom routine, to wash their hands before every meal, to brush their teeth, to cover their mouths when they cough. For the first time, hand-washing isn't just a hospital procedure or an advertising slogan. It's something taught to every child, repeated so often it stops feeling like medicine and starts feeling like common sense. Historians studying this era note that by the 1890s and into the new century, washing your hands quietly shifts from something only doctors did into something everyone is expected to do. And yet, even with schools teaching it and posters plastered across cities during the First World War, the habit still isn't universal, and it still isn't official. It takes another global catastrophe, the Second World War, and the unsanitary conditions it exposes, to finally push governments to act. In 1946, partly in response to what the war revealed about disease control, the United States creates the Centers for Disease Control. Even then, hand-washing does not become official federal public health policy in America until 1981, nearly a century and a half after a doctor in Vienna was locked in an asylum for suggesting the exact same thing. If you've made it this far, you now know something about the object on your bathroom sink that almost nobody else does. Subscribe to BeforeCommon because next week we're taking apart another everyday object hiding an origin story just as strange as this one. History has a strange habit of repeating itself, and soap proves it twice. 200 years after England first taxed soap so heavily that ordinary families couldn't afford to be clean, the country restricts it again, this time for a completely different reason. In February 1942, in the middle of the Second World War, soap is added to Britain's official rationing list alongside meat, sugar, and clothing. This isn't about punishing the poor. German submarines are strangling the country's supply lines, and the fats and oils that go into every bar of soap are desperately needed to help feed the nation instead. Each person is allotted just 3 ounces of soap every 4 weeks, weighed out like a precious commodity. It becomes such a scarce luxury that bars of soap are handed out as Christmas presents that year. The rationing doesn't end when the war does. It continues for another 5 years until 1950, nearly a century after the original soap tax was finally repealed. Twice, in the same country within less than 200 years, the simplest tool for staying alive is taken out of ordinary people's hands. First by greed, then by necessity. Both times it comes back. Today, hand-washing with soap remains one of the single most effective tools in all of public health, a fact reinforced on a global scale during the COVID-19 pandemic, when health authorities around the world pointed to plain soap and water as one of the most powerful defenses available against the virus. Which brings the story back to where it started. That plain, unremarkable bar of soap in your hand. It carries 4,000 years of chemistry passed hand to hand between empires. A tax that punished an entire nation for wanting to be clean. 2 doctors on 2 continents who told the truth and were destroyed for it. And a slow, hard-fought century that finally turned a Babylonian recipe for cleaning wool into one of the most powerful tools human beings have ever had for staying alive. The next time you use it without thinking, you'll know exactly what it took to get there.